All right, pledge allegiance. Mr. Barton, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here today. We are now going to go into our public comment section. First person who has signed up is Shannon Irvin. I'll now open the public comments. As a reminder for the audience that you have 3 minutes as an individual, 5 minutes as a group. You can specify that group, and you will be timed up. Shannon, you got some time. Go.
Thank you. I wanted to give you an update on where we were after the special session of the General Assembly in terms of our budget. We are receiving overall $72,541 less from our capital calculations based on what the governor had given us at $72,541 less. We are getting some federal funds of $146,899 in federal CARES Act, ARPA funds, to give $1,000 bonuses to staff members next December. It only covered 136 staff members, and we had 304 on staff. So that additional amount of funds would have to come from the local budget if we treated all employees similarly. In order to trim our budget from the $3.4 million request to the $1.5 million, the budget that was presented to the school board last Thursday night, that was balanced, included the elimination of 7 positions overall. It reduced the support staff scales from the $20 minimum wage down to $15 minimum wage, and took out the step corrections for the teacher scales that we had to do from steps 20 through the end of the scale. The balanced budget would be $30,817,769, and would require the $1.5 million contribution from the county to balance. So I'm here to answer any questions, or I can do that when we get to the budget section. But I just wanted to give you an update on where we were as of last Thursday.
Great, we'll save you the budget. Please stick around. All right, moving on. We have nobody else who has signed up to speak in public comments. This is your opportunity to speak if you wish to. Again, that's 3 minutes per individual. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in the public comments from the audience? Okay, hearing and seeing none, I now will close the public comment section at this time. Moving on to the consent agenda. Hopefully you all have had a chance to review. I believe, it is the chair's recommendation that we approve the consent agenda as is. Do we have a motion? So moved. We have a motion from Mr. Parr. Do we have support?
I will second.
Second from Mr. Reed. Any further discussion? Hearing no discussion, we will do a vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, let the record show that this motion passes unanimously. Moving on to presentations, Ian Baxter with the Hazard Mitigation Plan. Thank you for coming out here from the TJPDC. And for those who don't know, Mr. Baxter and I have interacted a lot with the Regional Housing Partnership and talked a lot on affordable housing. And I will encourage you after this meeting to maybe spend some time talking to them about the needs and efforts of our planning district. So, great.
Thank you, Chair Rutherford. My name is Ian Baxter. I'm a regional planner at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. I'm here today to talk to you all about the current 2023 update of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan for the region. I'm going to go through some of the high-level details about the process, talk through some of the data that we use to make our determination, and then give you a roadmap for what the next 6 months will look like in terms of the plan. So the purpose of the plan is basically to prepare for natural disasters before they occur. So we're looking to reduce loss of life, property damage, and destruction of commerce. But there's also obviously an incentive baked into this that FEMA requires natural hazard mitigation plans as a condition for eligibility to receive certain mitigation grants. So a locality or region-wide effort will have to be conducted every 5 years to update this plan to continue, in this case, Nelson's eligibility for FEMA disaster relief funds. And we obviously work closely with FEMA as well as VDEM, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. So there are 6 sections of the plan, and I'll briefly highlight them. I don't want to belabor what's already on the screen, but essentially we're looking to document both the planning process as well as high-level details about the community that we're conducting the plan update for. So that's the planning district, our 6 localities. That is general information about housing, transportation, the economy of the region, et cetera. What might have changed since 2018 when the last plan was conducted and approved. Then we get into the hazard identification and analysis section. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about this in a moment. But this basically includes, it's a determination made by the Hazard Mitigation Working Group, which is comprised of stakeholders and representatives from all 6 of the localities in the planning district, as well as some state experts. They basically take a set of data and then generate what's called a HIRA, which is basically a ranking, a matrix determining sort of the most hazardous natural hazard events in the planning district all the way down to the least. And so that I'll show that in a moment, but that's a pretty big part of the plan because it kind of determines what as a region is most dangerous. Then we conduct both a vulnerability and capability assessment. The vulnerability assessment is an analysis of sort of the human impacts that these could cause. So we use some proprietary software from FEMA to determine potential economic losses, as well as different types of damages. We use a variety of tools to basically determine how bad or how damaging a natural hazard could be for the region. A capabilities assessment is basically a survey of local capacity to not only plan for natural hazards, but respond accordingly. And then finally, we have a mitigation strategy, which is basically a list of actions for each locality to sort of what over the next 5 years they're planning on doing to not only prepare for natural disasters, but also respond to them. So that's sort of what's just included in the plan. And where we are on the timeline, we're actually in the midst of our public comment period. So the draft plan is up for public comment on the TJPDC website. This is just a brief overview. This is conducted every 5 years, but the plan update process itself takes a little bit over 2 years. We're hoping to have all of these be adopted formally by our member localities in 2023. But this kicked off midway through 2021, and we're hoping to wrap it up in early 2023. So this is the HIRA I was referring to. It's basically the chapter itself. There's a lot of data that's included in the packet that I sent over. And that's just an overview of the type of data that we use. But basically, this describes all the natural hazards that affect the planning district. So we're not obviously referring, we're not talking about volcanoes or tsunamis. We're talking primarily about, thunderstorms, tornadoes, earthquakes, things that actually happen in our planning district. There's data about the frequency, duration, and severity of these events. And so, yeah, they're presented in order of the relative risk that they pose to the region. And we use a risk matrix developed by Kaiser Permanente. And so this is the HIRA, the draft HIRA for 2023. You'll notice the top 3 hazards are hurricane, high winds, and windstorms are one. They all are grouped into one natural hazard type, flooding and winter storms and weather. And I just want to reiterate that the process by which this was created was this matrix I sent out along with for example, some of the data that you have. There's a lot more, and a lot of it is included in the plan, to members of all of the localities in the planning district, and I basically, I took all of their scores and combined them, and so this is the region-wide HIRA. So you'll notice in the appendix of the plan, it'll have what I received individually from each locality, but obviously due to geographic variation, population differences, there are different risks associated with each locality in the planning district, which is why we have those distinct mitigation action items in a different section. But this itself illustrates the relative risk of these natural hazards for the planning district at large, so the full region. And I'm not going to walk through each of these mainly because you probably can't read them. These are some of the information that's on these slides included in your packet. But I just wanted to give you a general overview of the type of data that the working group used to make some of these determinations. We're looking at historical data from NCDC and NOAA, as well as the National Weather Service, basically determining how often these events happen, how dangerous they are, and how much property loss is incurred. So you'll see most of the data that we use really, it really rests on that frequency, duration, and severity. And so we use a big variety of data sources, whether that be from national organizations and the agencies to state departments, but these are just examples of some of the data and the way it's presented within the draft plan to illustrate the relative risk. And so, again, we're looking primarily at severity, duration, and intensity. And I will actually highlight this and forgive some of the formatting on the slides. After obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, FEMA indicated that pandemic/communicable disease section be added to the plan. So obviously, while we focused a little bit on the COVID-19 pandemic within the planning districts, we were talking more broadly in that chapter about communicable disease. So things like hepatitis, Lyme disease, et cetera. There's different risk associated with each county, and we really relied on both the Blue Ridge Health District and the Virginia Department of Health for this section. And this slide is just a brief overview, again, some of the data sources that I was mentioning. If you'll notice, it seems like almost every department in the state of Virginia we engaged for data. I mean, we really relied on state experts. We actually had a few of them sit in the working group from the Virginia Department of Energy, but we had contacts at the Department of Forestry, Health, Conservation and Recreation, Environmental Quality, et cetera, using VDOT information as well, and also accessing national data sources. So Center for Disease Control, American Society for Civil Engineers, and obviously the National Weather Service providing the bulk of the data. I do want to highlight and sort of, say thank you, I guess, to the locality staff. We're sort of able to, we're getting this data from the National Weather Service. These aren't people, obviously, that live in, for example, Nelson. So some of basically we relied on locality staff to provide sort of narrative information highlighting some of the storms. So anecdotal information about, for example, how severe a storm was that you really wouldn't get from anyone else other than emergency management personnel or folks that actually live in the community. So if you kind of think of that top part of the data or those top organizations, it's really kind of the base of the knowledge, and then it's filled in by locality staff and local news and other local resources. And so that's for the HIRA. The vulnerability assessment, like I said earlier, is mainly providing an overview and analysis of vulnerability. So in amount of economic damage that could be caused by natural hazards as well as potential loss of life. We use a proprietary software developed by FEMA called HAZIS, which is required by FEMA in the update of this plan. It's actually a really great tool. It does require a little bit of GIS expertise, but it can produce these really, I think, great looking maps that can mainly look primarily at hurricanes, earthquakes, and tornadoes. And so this is a model based on Hurricane Fran, which came near the region in 1996. And so you'll just notice this is a good example of by census track the amount of direct economic damage that this tool is estimating. And so obviously in this case, it looks like the eastern part of the planning district is, the southeastern rather, is getting hit harder than the northwestern. And this does the same piece of software. It does some really cool flooding, can produce some really cool flooding maps. So this is the town of Scottsville in southern Albemarle County. And you'll notice on the left, there's the projected economic damage for a 100-year flood, which is also known as a 1% flood. So this is something that would only theoretically happen once in every 100 years. But it's kind of like worst case scenario in a lot of cases for flooding. And so you'll notice on the left, it's economic damage, and on the right, it's flood death. So in this case, we're looking at a significant amount of economic damage and presumably loss of life in Scottsville were this to occur. This is a little harder to read. It looks better within the report, but it's just another tool we use from the Southern Group of State Foresters. It's basically a burn probability metric. And so you'll notice, and this is detailed in the report, that most of the planning district is not really at very high risk of wildfire, but there are pockets of Nelson, Greene, and parts of Albemarle that are a little bit more. So this is just, again, another example that we use to determine vulnerability and potential damage from storms and other weather events. And finally, the mitigation action items section for each locality and town within the planning district that's expected to adopt this in 2023. FEMA and VDEM want them to have a list of sort of action steps that they're willing to take, and so to prepare for natural hazards. And this, of course, it kind of is similar to sort of like a comprehensive plan type document where a lot of these goals are aspirational and there's no real penalty for not achieving them. But I think the purpose here is to bake into the county's next 5 years some emergency management best practices or other proactive steps. And so hidden, or presented within each of these tables is basically how much it'll cost, when it'll be done, how highly the county or city prioritizes this action, and then what type of hazard it's intended to mitigate. So within the draft plan, you'll find a whole section of Nelson County activities that was provided to me by Russell Gibson here at the county, and that this whole table will be filled out for all of those actions. And finally, our next steps. So again, we are in the midst of the public comment period from now until June 30th. On the TJPDC website, the draft's available, and all public comments can be sent to me. My email and phone number is on the website accompanying that draft. We'll then submit it to VDEM, get it turned around from them. Hopefully, we don't need anything to correct anything, but if we do, submit it again, then to FEMA with the same process. And then we'll come before you again in 2023 to ask for formal adoption of the plan. So that's kind of the sort of overview, and we wanted to make sure that we were coming before all the boards and councils in the planning district to let them know that we were sort of almost at the end of this update process, answering the questions they had about the actual process itself, and then just let you know we'll be back within 6-ish months to get this adopted.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions for Mr. Baxter at this time? Again, thank you for your hard work. That was some great data, and we look forward to. And what time frame do you suspect?
I would say early 2023, so January, February.
All right, see you again then.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. All right, moving on into the next presentation, the Criminal Justice Board, Neil Goodlow. Thank you, sir, for tracking on down here.
Quite welcome. Thank you for asking me to come back. While the presentation is loading, I want to express my appreciation to Mr. Rutherford, who serves on our Community Criminal Justice Board. Also Jim Hall, who serves from Nelson County. Also want to express my appreciation to Superintendent Mark Coomer at the Regional Jail. Without his collaboration, what you're about ready to see would simply not be possible and isn't available to most jurisdictions in the Commonwealth. So what you're going to be looking at is the third in a series of these reports that document trends in jail utilization specifically for Nelson County at the Albemarle-Charlottesville Regional Jail. And these trends are tracked demographically by race, by gender, by age group, by charge type, by charge level, and they're tracked over a 10-year period of time. But as you are probably acutely aware, the last 2 years have been unusual from the standpoint of the COVID pandemic. So I take some effort in this report to also isolate those 2 years from the rest of the trend lines to show you how influential those 2 years have been on your jail utilization trends. So first, let me describe some definitions. An intake is a person taken into the jail. Doesn't matter how many charges they're taking in on. It doesn't matter what type of charges they're taken in on. Doesn't matter how long they stay. It's simply the taking of the inmate into the jail. And I had to take out weekenders because of the way the two different systems, the old legacy system called Pistol and the new system called New World at the jail, count weekenders differently. So I had to remove them to cleanse the data. Once that was done, you can see where Nelson intakes were up 51%, specifically starting in 2015, and then dropping sharply during the pandemic years of 20 and 21. However, as a share of total intakes at the jail, Nelson's increase was 108% compared to a very modest increase in Albemarle County of 9% and an actual drop of 25% in intakes for City of Charlottesville inmates. By race, most significant was the intakes of white inmates, up 63% compared to a much smaller increase among black inmates, and a much higher increase of intakes of female inmates, 217%, compared to those of male intakes. By age group, and I have been seeing this routinely every jurisdiction I study. The only group that is down in terms of their intake volume are the very youngest inmates, age 18 to 24. And this has ramifications for your bed days expenditures, as you will see shortly. Most significantly are the increases in the age 30 to 39 group and the age 50 plus age group. By and large, the average age of an inmate in the jail has increased slightly, but not nearly as significantly as other jurisdictions that I study. A little bit about weekenders. Once I isolated the weekenders from the rest of the data, I determined that they averaged about 2.4% of all Nelson County intakes, and that increased from 2017 to 2021, and specifically increased during the 2 pandemic years. Okay, now for another definition. A booking is a charge. It is not a person. I can be brought in, I can be taken into the jail on breaking and entering and grand larceny, for instance, and that's 2 bookings. They are the best measure of the kinds of charges that people are coming in on the jail, into the jail line, as an intake is a better metric of how many people are coming into the jail. Booking volume increased more than twice as fast as did your intake volume. And there's a reason for this, up 133%, again, dipping strongly during 20 and 21. Felony bookings specifically are the most influential charge level that is impacting your booking volume, up 352%. Again, with a significant dip in 2020 and a partial rebound in 2021. One of the reasons why your bookings are up stronger than your intakes are is that you have more charges per intake event, 47% more in 2021 than you had in 2011. And now for a little bit about the pandemic. There's been a general downward trend, which was actually beginning before the onset of the pandemic, with the exception of an anomaly in the 3rd quarter of 2019. The trend was down, and the trend continued down over the course of the 4-year period. And that trend was down both among felony charges and misdemeanor charges, but down more strongly among misdemeanors. And interestingly enough, trending up very slightly among felonies even during the pandemic. So the next thing I'm going to show you are the top 10 booking charges by type that pertain to Nelson County inmates at Acrj. They are narcotics, driving while intoxicated, assault, larceny, operator's license charges, probation violations, contempt of court, weapons charges, alcohol charges, and fraud. And those are by volume over the entire 10-year period. When I look at the rates of change among these different charge types, you can see most specifically the increase among probation violators of 610% over that 10 years. Followed by a 400% increase in narcotics and a 308% increase in weapon, although there are 4 more charge types that have increases of more than 90%, being assault charges, larcenies, contempt of court, and fraud. The only things that were down were operator's license charges and alcohol offenses. When I look specifically at the 4 years prior to the pandemic and post onset of pandemic, you can see a significant change in the patterns of booking types over those 4 years. Everything down strongly except for assault and larceny, which continue to increase by volume during the pandemic. Now for probation violations specifically, the rate at which probation violations represent percentage of all Nelson County bookings increased 142% during the last 10 years. By 2021, they represented 6.82% of all booking volume. So this is a depiction of that data. Much more significant increases at the felony level than at the misdemeanor probation violation level. All right, so intakes are an important metric. Intakes plus average length of stay equals cost. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about average length of stay. Average length of stay for Nelson County inmates increased 65%, all of that after 2018, and climbing very, very strongly during the two pandemic years. I'll also remind you that there was a difference in the rate of increase among felony and misdemeanor charges, and that's likely accounting for much of this increase in length of stay. The entire increase is associated with white inmates, up 116%. Average length of stay among black inmates actually fell 27%. And again, female inmate average length of stay up more than twice that of males. The most significant increase in average length of stay was among your oldest inmates, over the age of 50. With fairly strong increases also among the age 25 to 29 group. You will notice almost no change in average length of stay among your youngest inmates. And again, this will have implications for your cost. So bed day expenditures, take your intake volume and multiply it by your average length of stay. And that results in an increase in your bed day expenditures at the jail of 175%. The cost of an inmate day is $112 currently as calculated by the Virginia Compensation Board. And one of the things that's important to consider, at least in terms of the bill you get from Acrj, is how you fare relative to the other two members of the Acrj authority. And in this particular case, you're up 243% in terms of your share, whereas Albemarle's is up fairly marginally at 14% and Charlottesville's down 35%. As recently as 2006, you had about a 5% share of jail bed day expenditures. It's now over 17%. Again, all of that associated with white inmates. And twice the increase in bed day expenditures among female inmates than male inmates, although male inmates are also up very strongly. When we look at the age characteristics of bed day expenditures, we see a 500% increase among inmates who are over the age of 50 years old. And essentially no increase among your youngest inmates. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that you actually support two jails. One of them is a catch and release jail. About 35% of your inmates are arrested, booked, and released within 24 hours. The average length of stay for somebody who's serving less than 30 days is only 5 days as a result. But the inmates that are costing you the most money are actually the orange line at the bottom. Up 103% inmates who are serving more than 30 days at Acrj. And when I say more than 30 days, and they're up 28% as a percentage of all of your intakes and releases. they serve over 200 days on average. So some of these are very, very long-staying inmates who are pulling up your average. Consequently, if you want to see where your bed day expenditures are increasing, it is specifically among this group of longer staying inmates, serving an average of over 200 days apiece. And they represent about 95% of your bed day expenditures, even as they represent almost. They represent about a little more than 35% of your overall inmate count. So you put all this together, you've had sizable increases in intakes, mostly associated with probation violations and narcotics charges in terms of the rate of increase. When you add that to increases in your average length of stay, they have a combined effect on your bed day expenditures and ultimately on your cost. And while there was some mitigation in this trend during the pandemic years, there are suggestions, at least comparing 21 to 22 data that I have so far, that trend might be reversed. I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot tell you what your metrics will look like this time next year. There are too many variables involved. One of them is quite simply whether the COVID pandemic has changed human behavior, both offender behavior and criminal justice behavior. And I don't have the answer to that question yet.
The question that comes to my mind, and each of these that you're talking about, is why. Do you have any answers to the question why we are so much above other Charlottesville and the county?
I do not.
Now, who does?
I would say that's a jurisdictional discussion for you to have with your stakeholders within the county. I try to stay away from answering why questions. I see my role as providing you with the data that allows your jurisdiction to have discussions among stakeholders involving those why questions. I think from the data, simply from the data, the run-up in narcotics charges and probation violations, which are oftentimes related to continued drug use, certainly have a bearing on what you're seeing.
But you present us with this data, so we should be asking the question why. Right?
You should be asking the question why, yes.
I've got a question. Do you have any data on the number of bed days or intakes that are residents of Nelson County?
It's a great question. It was actually asked by your Commonwealth's attorney a couple months ago, and so I did an analysis which showed about 50% of the charges, or 50% of the intakes, so we're talking people, 50% of those are of individuals who live in a zip code that is not affiliated with Nelson County. Having said that, I ran the tape the other way, and there are equal numbers of Nelson County inmates at Acrj on Charlottesville and Albemarle charges. So there's a flow going both ways. Nelson County residents committing crimes in other jurisdictions and residents of other jurisdictions committing crimes in Nelson County. And the fact is that's true for every jurisdiction that I study. There is significant mobility, and particularly at the felony level, among individuals who live on the fringes of your jurisdiction. Augusta, Buckingham, Amherst.
Does that play out for bed days as well?
It does. And it does specifically for probation violations because they are notorious bed day consumers.
Any other questions for Mr. Goodlow at this time? Yeah, thank you so much.
Wait, one more question. When a person is in the jail, all right, he is in jail during his trial, if he doesn't get bond, let's say, how often are they in jail to serve their sentences?
I'm not sure
If
I follow
they're
your question.
convicted of larceny, let's say, what is the percentage that stay in jail or are transferred to prison?
Oh, good question. So only about 4% of your intake volume can be identified as inmates who end up being transferred into DOC custody. It's a very small number. Obviously, it's largely populated with felons. But even at the felony level, you are more likely to get booked into Acrj, whether you're bonded or not, if you end up getting a sentence, to end up serving your sentence locally. And in fact, most individuals who are serving 2 years or less are going to serve it locally. The state will provide a per diem of, I think it's $12 a day to support what are called state responsible inmates who have been sentenced on a felony. But that comes nowhere close to the total cost of that inmate's bed day.
If a person is in prison, how much responsibility for paying for that is what county there?
0.
We pay, and I think, what's the rule? If you stay, if it's a year, more than a year sentence or more than 30 days, the state's supposed to cover the cost.
Well, I'll cover $12 of it.
Right, that's very nice of them.
There was some legislation in the General Assembly this year to raise that per diem. I'm not sure how generous that raise would be, but I can assure you it would come nowhere close to $112.
Sure, of course.
That 4% figure of those that go from the jail to prison, how would Nelson County fare for specific statistics on that?
I'd have to be working on that, but I'd be happy to run that for you.
Any other questions for Neil? There you go. Thank you, Neil. Appreciate you traveling up here and circulating this data.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Moving on to VDOT, Smart Scale. Rick. I got a bone to pick.
There's always a benefit.
Yes, Mr. Park.
On this, we had this report, which is very interesting.
Sure.
Would you ask the Commonwealth's attorney to come and explain things
Yes.
to us?
We can outreach to him, I guess. I think he had the, yeah, we can do that. We can have him come in July. I'll shoot him a message. I think he had the intention of being here, but I think they have court today. So I don't think he could help. But attorneys interact a lot.
Yeah, that's an interesting question of how these reports are reviewed. It would be interesting to get their input for review of this, and the earlier report, it would be interesting to get the review from Russell or whoever or staff about the EMS program, just so we would have some.
Could the sheriff be here too?
Of course. We can get them all.
You can ask him.
All right, let's get on with VDOT. He's up here.
Well, greetings, it's a pleasure to be here. We're starting to get out more and more face-to-face meetings. Been cooped up for the last 2 years, doing mostly virtual meetings. It's nice to get out of the office every now and then. I'm here today to discuss smart scale applications that Nelson County has put into the pre-application process. And for those unfamiliar with smart scale, it is the program by which VDOT scores and measures performance of transportation infrastructure improvement projects. And to date, we're in round 5 of Smart Scale. This is a competitive process that is undertaken every 2 years. In those 2-year cycles between rounds, we conduct studies most often. The projects that you're seeing today have all been the result of either older or some newer studies, and are projects that have yet to be funded through Smart Scale. To date, Nelson County has been pretty successful with our studies that we've done in conjunction with VDOT in Nelson County. We've seen a number of improvements along the 151 corridor, and also in addition to the Route 29 corridor. What I'm going to show you today are the 3 projects that are in the kitty, so to speak. The lights off. Okay. That are in the kitty, so to speak, in the pre-application. They have been validated and have been justified to move forward in the Smart Scale application. And so billing and planning staff are working towards fulfilling those applications and getting those completed. As a requirement of the applications, it is a requirement of the Smart Scale procedures for the Board of Supervisors of the local jurisdiction to pass resolutions supporting the projects, and that's why we're here discussing these today. The first 2 projects that I'm going to show you are previous projects that have been submitted in previous rounds and are still feasible in their design and in their concept. And each one of these are on the 151 corridor. And these are results from the study that we did on the 151 corridor back in, I think it was 2013, which Mr. Harvey and Ms. Brennan at the time were the 2 champion board members that participated in that effort. 151 and 6, this is at the large intersection with the AEP site located there. And as part of that, this is going to be a roundabout concept. The current cost is going to be pretty much be inflated from this figure. This is the cost that we pulled out of the round 4 that was submitted under round 4. As you all are aware, costs are going up day by day. This part of the process. So we're anticipating that this will be no different. The $13 million price tag on this one's probably going to jump more than likely into the 17 and 18 million by the time it's all said and done. Projects are not getting cheaper, they're getting more expensive. Supply chains are an issue as well. Despite that, we're still staying on target on budget with most of our projects. And again, this is what we call PSI, potential for safety improvement. It's one of the higher PSI intersections in the county. And the previous board, again, had submitted this, the county submitted this previous times. I think this one was just out of the funding scenario in the last round. Yeah, I mean, I'll jump to this one before we get into until we get into the controversy. All right. The last one is right up near Mr. Harvey. This is a Tanbar 151. It's a $7 million project that really is doing a road straightening and bank cut. There's been a number of accidents at this location, fatality back years ago, and we looked at cheaper options to get here, but really there's only one option, and that's to realign and do the bank cut here in order to make it a safer section of road. And again, both of these projects were previously submitted under Smart Scale, supported by the board, and county has put forth those projects again. Now let's go back. So one of the new projects that we have identified came out of what we call our project pipeline. This was a new state initiative. Our overreaching transportation document, B-Trans, identifies what they call priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 locations. You were privileged enough to have this intersection identified as a priority 1 location. So that is pretty much a direct result of the number of accidents that occur at this location, not only from cross-feeding, turning movements, rear end collisions, you name it, you've had just about every accident at this location. Back when we did the Lovingston study, I think in 05, I think it was when this traffic signal was first put in, soon after that study. And we've continued to see this as a problematic intersection over the years. So up comes along Project Pipeline, which is charged with looking at the high priority one locations in our district. We had a couple in Lynchburg, a couple in Danville, and we had one rural jurisdiction. Nelson County was the prize winner to have this intersection reviewed and studied over the last really year that we've gone through. And one of the unique things about the Project Pipeline is because of the virtual environment, we did what was called a Metro Quest survey. And the Metro Quest survey, the virtual meetings that we had, allows the general public to have access through social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so forth, to go on and answer questions in regards to the project areas. Now, I'll be honest with you, anytime we throw out alternative intersections, as we call them, roundabouts are one of those. R-cuts are one of the other alternatives that you're seeing more and more up and down through the corridor. You'll see one going in at Tight Squeeze, at 29. They had one that was almost identical to this one that was funded in the last round. And that one's going to be going in at Tight Squeeze. And you're going to see up in Remington and some of the places up towards north of Charlottesville, a couple of other R-cut intersections that will be going in. Now, the one unique thing about the R-cut projects is they are newer to Virginia, but they're not newer to other jurisdictions in other states. North Carolina, if you're familiar with Wilmington and 17 going down from Wilmington to Myrtle Beach, back years and years ago, the North Carolina DOT went in and put R-cuts in before any economic development came in through the area. And despite that, the same issues you guys are going to bring up, economic development came. Economic development flourished through that section of 17, and it created a very safe corridor. Now, the other unique thing about this particular location is Route 29. It is a corridor of statewide significance. So VDOT has a specific interest, and the state has a specific interest in seeing this corridor maintain its thoroughfare approach. You know, you're generating 28,000 to 30,000 vehicles at some sections through 29 through the district. I think we're probably sitting at around 16 to 20 vehicles per day coming through this particular location. And so most of your movements are the commuter through movements, you know, serving the travel public. You've got heavy freight movements through here as well. So there's only so many different type of alternatives that you can look at when you look at a particular signalized intersection in a rural jurisdiction. And the R-cut is the preferred alternative. Now, through the Metro Quest survey, again, your local jurisdictions, some of you may have participated in it, were able to answer questions in regards to what the general feel was for these particular projects. Now, I don't have to sit here and tell you that everybody was overly excited about this new alternative coming in at this location, but no matter what project we put forth as part of the review, nobody was really overjoyed. Now, we can say the same thing about roundabouts. Most people absolutely hate roundabouts until they start traveling in them and find that they're actually much easier than you know, generally think. What the R-cut does, if I were to throw up a diagram at the intersection there at Front Street in Callahan, you will see 32 conflict points. At any typical signalized intersection, there's 32 potential conflict points. So any type of turning movement, cross movement that you can think of, they're there in that particular intersection. What the R-cut does, it doesn't eliminate, but it does reduce. So the R-cut, you go down to about 24 potential conflict points. Roundabout would take it down to about 16 conflict points. But a roundabout is not feasible at this location based upon topography for one, some of the general movements. You've got to have some equality in some of the movements and form to work effectively. So the R-cut here reduces from 32 to 24. It is still signalized in certain capacities, and that's mainly for your left turn movements. The main movement that is taken away is the cross feed from Front Street to Tower Hill. and that will require a U-turn movement downstream. So if you're coming out of Front Street, you'll make a right, you'll go down to crossover, you'll go down to U-turn movement area. There'll be a signal there that will help flow that traffic through. Now, the signal is, we go down to what we call two-phase. So we go from a four-phase, which is all stops, to a two-phase, which is allowing more movement through the through movements, and then controlling the left turn movements to associate those movements at the appropriate time. Also, if you're coming out of Cali Hill from the Food Mart Shopping Center, you'll make a right out. If you're trying to get across, you'll go down, make a U-turn, and come back. U-turns are proven to be more safe and effective, and that's one of the reasons why you see these particular alternatives coming into play, and these recommendations on basically parkway type 4-lane, divided highways. We can fit them in with limited right of way. We still have some right of way here, but for the most part, it fits within the footprint of the roadway. So this is the third project that Nelson County has pushed forward for a smart scale application. I was asked to come today basically to explain each one of these to you. I'm sure I have a lot of questions in regards to this one specifically, because anything new always generates some questions.
Let's take the easy ones first. Let's go to the circle.
Okay.
Mr. Reed, this is your district.
So start date 8/15/25.
So if it gets funded, again, these were round four figures that we pulled up. We're going through the review process now for the new budgets. You'll see the kick-out date will more than likely be about 27, 28 on a start now versus these were the last. So basically, this end date that you see on here will more than likely be close to the start date. We're 2 years advanced, and then there's a cycle of time when the money becomes available and we have to start in those out years.
My only comment is not soon enough.
Yeah, so certain projects, for example, Acrj, we had a turn lane approved there where we did a study back years ago in support of blocking. And based on this past December, there was some performance money that came available, and we were able to get that project funded. So that's going to come on faster. If we get opportunities to advance, we do when we can. And depends upon how flush we get with money, and that's an up and down process.
So let us know when that opportunity presents.
That's right. What our hope is now is it gets funded, then we can worry about how fast we get it.
All right, any other comments about the traffic circle?
Roundabout.
Roundabout.
Amherst County has a traffic.
All right. Let's go on to the next one. Take Martin. All right. Mr. Harvey, I think you know a little bit about this one. Take it all. The whole. Oh yeah, he says he wants you to buy all of it.
Well, for us, all the work is south of his business. So.
Yeah, I got you. So that gets us 2030. I tell you, that's something we're 8-10 years out. All right. Anybody have comments about 151 and Tambar? If we don't now, let's go to day.
You turn all the workers move back south.
Yeah, coming back south from your business, your gas station, most of that bank on that inside will be the road realignment. There'll be some work done in the intersection, but it shouldn't affect your business.
All right.
So just to give you an idea of, from a pricing standpoint, 9.5 million, that's pretty much current in today's dollars. You'll see that escalating in smart scale, and probably end up at about 13, 14 million.
Okay. Here's the deal. I did have a chance to talk to several constituents on Front Street, Cali Hill, and around, and EMS, and of course, and any new thing that you ever present is always a difficult thing. So I absolutely understand that. I'm in the construction business, so I do get it. do get it. Some of the concerns are obviously, safety is a precaution, something that we want to talk about. And that intersection has taken lives of people that I knew, and grew up with. And it's a serious intersection and, of course, I believe there was numerous different options and this just became one of the main ones that came as the best solution, right?
Well, let me put it to you this way. We're required to look at all options.
Sure.
We go through a very detailed analysis, looking through 32 different alternative analyses.
Sure.
Back when we did the Livingston study, we had a full-blown interchange at this location. For a long-term perspective, access roads on the backside, roundabout at 56 and so forth. This particular location now, based on, you have to look at the cost benefit aspect, interchange isn't justifiable at this stage. And out of all of the alternatives that we were able to justify that works for this particular intersection location, the Acrj is the top.
How many lights would that require?
So you've got signalized lights at the two left turn movements at the middle of the intersection. And then you've got two-phase signals, and they're all two-phase, which basically means stop and go when you're allowed to go. You've got a phase down that will stop the flow of traffic on a limited basis to allow the movements. So you've got 4 signals, but you're actually, because they're two-phase, you're much less than you are at a typical 4-phase, much less than what you currently have now. So you'll have more through movement, and you'll have better protected left movements as through the corridor.
I'm sure you're aware that our Department of Social Services and Planning and Zoning are planning to be on Capitol Drive in the near future, which is going to generate a great amount of trips there, many of which would be crossover from Front Street.
Well, you have another access point just on the other side of town, too. There's a crossover there. It's not as problematic now. More than likely, when you put this in, you'll see more people go to that particular access point in order to make that left turn movement. Again, the R-cut will substantiate and hold the volumes and support additional volumes going through. It's just a different method of how the volumes are getting through there.
I just wonder if, we're a lot of people, and this is just not anything more than my experience to see getting into accidents is, when they make a left-hand turn. Remember, that was a very big deal, initially. And I remember specifically hearing my friends tell the story about when the cops came to the high school to then get all the kids who were driving, give them a lesson about how to make that left-hand turn, properly and safely. I just, for me, I look at this from not only an economics and traffic perspective, the future of Livingston, I just think it might be a little bit soon for us to be the experiment for an R-cut, at least for our general area, because I can't name one, at least, I think there's some in Troutville in that area, but I can't really name one in
You guys were actually the first one at 6:29.
right when we were approved for that one.
Yeah, that was an R-cut based design.
Right.
Of course, we were able to justify eliminating that project because some of the other smaller projects that we did there.
Sure.
But you guys were actually the first one.
Gotcha.
The other one, like I said, is under design now, and that's at 5 speeds.
Right.
It's almost exactly like, it is reminiscent, and then you could lay these two over, and they would be identical.
As would Pennsylvania, you haven't done it yet.
Pennsylvania County's full support.
Huh?
And that was when we did, you guys would have probably seen this a couple of years ago,
Right.
when we did what we call the arterial preservation plans, and that's when we looked at 29 and 460 in our
Right.
district. We just, because of the lesser problems in this area, we didn't look at Nelson, per se, we stopped pretty much right there at the bypass of Kenny County.
So, I don't really have a picture in my mind. There's no traffic going across.
That's correct.
And to turn left into the supermarket, you would go beyond the intersection?
If you're trying to come out of Front Street,
No, no.
You got
If
laser.
you're coming from the south on 29,
you would,
and you want to go to the food line, you would go beyond the intersection and
so if you're going from 29 south heading towards Charlottesville, you would get into this lane here and make that left. So that left turn movement, these two left turn movements are still there. The only thing that's been eliminated is the cross movement, which is where most of the accidents are occurring.
Right.
So if you're coming on north or south on 29, you still have access for right turns on Front Street, right turns on Capitol Hill, and you still have access for left turns, protected left turns, into Capitol Hill and into Front Street. Campbell County, if you've gone down Ward's Road or anything in Campbell County, we've got a few of those arc-cut premises already in place, protected lanes.
They got such a high traffic thing going on there on Wards.
Well, the other problem here too, because of the speeds that are coming through this will actually slow the speeds down. But the speeds coming through here are pushing over 60 miles an hour, even coming through the 45 area.
So you saying the speed limits are gonna change all of 29, kind of in that area?
Well, what I'm saying is, your speed limits now are through here at 45.
Right.
Most people are still running 60 coming through the city, which is another part of the problem. With the arc cut, you're pushing signal, you're putting the signal out a little bit more, so you'll have more.
So your 45 is.
Right, you'll have more advanced work.
So if you're coming, I'll just say south of the first light you're going to see is going to be just down from the self-storage.
Right, the U-turn.
And that will be, stop, go, yellow, basically.
Correct.
Okay. So there's a series of 1, 2 lights either way.
Right, so they'll be coordinated based upon how much traffic flow is coming. Because your left turn movements, your U-turn movements, even though they're your more problematic accident areas, they're lesser, so they can stack a little bit longer, but in the through movements, and then when you get a gap, those signals will go on, left turns will make their U-turns, and then as soon as they're through, the coordinated signals will then allow this other continual through movements to basically join in with it.
And the only warning before you get to the first stoplight would be lowering the speed.
Well, what we're looking at is actually having advanced beacons coming in before the turn.
So you have flash.
Yeah, flashing. But, the problem with the flashing beacons is anybody can probably tell you get so used to them over a period of time. You see them, but you don't really register. So, sadly, where we're at with this particular intersection, the three alternatives that came up were different varieties of arc-cut options that were the safest, most cost beneficial projects. The problem with, and this is strictly a county decision, it's the board's decision on whether to push the project through or not. We're gonna be back here again in 2 years, probably with the same exact project. Because there's just so much, only so much you can do there.
So if we were to not push for this at this time, it would come back in 2 years.
The possibility when you guys want us to go back and restudy the intersection again, because of the accidents that are occurring, the same recommendation.
Right. I'm just wondering what the process would be if we either accept or reject that.
And I guess this is an interesting thing to me. Why does the state, state does safety things all the time, they eliminate roads, they add guardrails. If this project is that big of a deal, why aren't they just doing it?
The state doesn't have the capacity monetarily to do that kind of project from a local perspective. Robert doesn't have that kind of money in his safety operations to do a $13 million project.
Well, I'm still a little bit hesitant at this time, and, I think of course, if this were to be voted on in public, community, community input is a critical thing. I would suggest, at this time that the current setup be amended to omit the Livingston intersection. And, if we're getting up in the next year, we start trying to educate the populace, it's probably the suggestion I would make.
And we would still have that same opportunity, say you push this through, pass resolution support you to at least compete. And more than likely, it's going to score pretty well. When we go through the design public hearing, there's opportunities for public input. There'll be a number of public input sessions.
But there wouldn't be an opportunity to kind of say, no, we changed our mind, we don't want this archive.
You have that option.
So that option does exist.
It does exist.
So we can.
It's not something that, it doesn't look good from a county perspective.
Yeah.
You go through that, you go through the competition, and the project is funded. When we did it with the other project, we built the justification. VDOT made that decision, so it's, a little easier. This one, it'd be more challenging, I think, to go through because you've still got a problem at that intersection. And if you've got projects that will supplant the existing issue and create a more safer environment, then it's going to be a little bit more challenging to eliminate it because you've still got a problem. But the education component, I'm happy to come back, have meetings, anything like that if necessary.
So if we proceed forward with this, there would be an opportunity as a board to say, we changed our mind. We saw the public comments, we want to not participate in this one. So that opportunity will still exist?
Yeah, just about in every project that we've had some kind of conversation with new board members, new boards.
Sure. And they said, let's not back out.
Right.
All right, I think we could do
The
that.
main thing is we shouldn't pay for the line. The highway people go back to the expert chiefs or everything.
Sure.
The fact that they recommend,
Yep.
whether we like it or not.
And there will be.
Public safety.
And there would be a point at some point where the state probably would just, trump us and say, we're doing this. So I'm willing to support it knowing that knowledge. Okay, knowing the knowledge that there's, after community input, that we can make a different change of posture as a board.
Yeah, we'll partner with Nelson County, whatever's necessary to build that.
I think that's fine with me.
And when,
Jesse, if you put everything out there for public opinion.
Oh, no, I understand that.
You would never get anything.
I understand that, but we gotta let the public be educated on what a hard cut is, because everyone's gonna be learning something. If it's something that makes sense, so. All right, I'm fine with moving forward on that one.
And I would just, when we see you again in 2 years, I would, well, okay, whenever it is, on this specifically, it would be really interesting to have, the data on, accidents and renders and all that kind of stuff that happened between now and then.
I think in support of what you're saying, because we did a lot of this virtually, and the fact that we are having meetings now, I think I can more than happy to have our consultants come back and we have a work session that the community can be invited to. We can demonstrate how they work, show you the accident information and all that.
Yeah, the data is going to be important.
Absolutely.
If we move forward with this, when you're coming down Cow Hill Drive, taking a right onto 29 heading south, right there at that stoplight, there's always this huge pothole right there. Can you?
As you can see, anytime we do construction projects, there's certain limits that we have to tie into so I'm more than likely, most of that hillside and that intersection would be redone as part of that project. And that's what really kicks in the rising utility costs, because when you get into those areas, that's where most of your electric lines, power lines, and everything else are sitting there.
All right, good enough.
So it's just a pothole.
Yeah, every time it's fixed, it comes back within days.
Yeah.
Every single time. I mean, it never gets
They
fixed.
never, I don't even know what it,
Well, pothole is just a temporary fix.
Yeah, it's a drainage.
Yes.
Drainage issue.
All right, so moving on, it's Chair's recommendation that we approve Resolution R 2022-35, Smart Scale Submission as presented. We have a motion. We need a motion. Mr. Harvey made a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Second from Mr. Parr. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll do a vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any objections, abstentions? Hearing none, let the record show that this vote was unanimous. Thank you, sir.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Met with, Mr. Reed back early this spring and brought up 151 corridor. We discussed the past study and we discussed the timeframe that is taking place from the past study to where we are currently and the growth that the corridor is continuing to see. And be happy to tell you guys that we will be kicking off the new 151 corridor study this fall.
Great.
Some people have probably already seen some traffic counts being conducted right towards the end of May. You're going to see some more in July, and we'll see some more in the fall as a part of that to support the data going into that study. I should have a scope of work hopefully by the end of this week once I get that. Of course, I'm going to look to Mr. Harvey and Mr. Reed for you guys to be champions on that study team, just like you were before. And so we'll ask Nelson County to review that, take a look at it, make sure it meets your guys' needs. And but I've got the funding for it. We're ready to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
My pleasure.
All right, Pete, out report.
I don't think we have a whole lot of any outstanding items from last month. I think we I want to talk about something. I don't remember what that was.
We were going to talk about the status of the traffic center.
I don't have a whole lot to report today. I hope you've been up to the Nelson Woodside, seen the new pavement up there. That turned out real nice. No, up on Louisville.
Oh, I see that, yeah.
It's kind of completes our revitalization of our wayside there.
And you pay for the Porta John now, correct?
And Port John's up there, got an ADA accessible Port John, as well as two up there.
Good.
Two.
And what's the status of the mountains of debris?
We are in the process of procuring a contractor to grind that up and remove it. That will be removed shortly. That's not long.
Shortly is.
Well, I mean, as soon as we did an ASD, administrative service contract, quick quote. I don't know if Protect was in it, but it has a short advertisement through it, so we can get someone in there to a contractor to grind and remove that debris. I hope it's 90 days or less. I hope. Then once that is removed, we are going to get rid of that pile of that pile of soil and gravel that I think we put that there as part of a bridge project. We will remove that, and it's my intention to completely clean up that area and not use it as a disposal area anymore. So that area's got to be too high profile. We just renovated the wayside, and with the hopefully the canoe launch coming right there, that we want to move away from using that beat out right away for those purposes.
Great.
That's my goal.
Thank you. Ours too.
Also, Wilson Road, we're working on Wilson Road, rural rustic project. We are mowing 29 4 lanes as we speak. And also, I don't know if any of you, Mr. Boyd, I don't know if you've been on Tyler River Road. We've been doing some major patching and widening over there in preparation for a center line to be put on Tyler River Road. So that should be coming very quick. And that's, Chairman, I have a tiny mountain lane that's in your area, isn't it?
Yes, you spoke with,
I spoke with Ms. Collins.
yes.
I'm going to send her that information. today or tomorrow.
Great.
But anyway, I know if that group pursues revenue sharing, that'll be the first one first one I've done with Nelson County, so I know we might need some help on that with some folks. Which I think we'll take revenue sharing applications. What's revenue sharing, next round?
Alternates between smart stuff, so it'll be next year.
Next year. Next year.
Great.
And other than that, that's about all I have. Anything for me?
Mr. Barton, do you have anything to add?
No.
All right, Mr. Harvey.
Right now.
All right, Mr. Reed?
No.
Mr. Carr? All right, I don't have anything at this time. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for coming out. It's a good day. All right, moving on to, we have another series of new and unfinished business. I would suggest before we get to the budget, probably take a quick break or somewhere in there. We'll see how these next few items go. So proposed subdivision and zoning amendment still.
So I have a couple proposed subdivision and zoning ordinance updates for you guys to review today. Our departments received 2 inquiries regarding permitting, one for a commercial kennel and 2 for a service dog facility as the primary use of property. The proposals were attached with your packet. They both propose to locate along Route 151. So in order to facilitate and process these, staff seeking feedback regarding a potential update to the current definition for kennel, potential new use for assistance dog facility, as well as their use classifications. So before we go on, I'll show you the proposals we've received. This one is for Service Dogs of Virginia. It's a service dog facility. They've been in operation for about 20 years, and they have a location where they do some training in Charlottesville, but nothing on this scale. And so what they're proposing is a training center, adult kennel, nursery, a facility manager's residence, and then a client dormitory where the clients will come lodge on the property and train with the animals for 2 weeks at a time. It's a nonprofit agency accredited through Assistance Dogs International, which is who I did some research through. So there's the client dorm, some more information about that. The parcel is about 10 acres, and here's its location on 151. So here's Chapel Hollow and Lundell Hollow, right in the middle there. So the reason I show you this is because if we're going to discuss a proposed new use for this, this is what it would be for. So currently our definition,
You can turn the lights off. That helps you some.
so there's the Blue Ridge Bed and Breakfast. There's the campus there. So this is a new Hicks home right here. So currently our definition for kennel is a place prepared to house, board, breed, handle, or otherwise keep or care for dogs, cats, or similar small animals for sale or in return for compensation. This is a by right use in A1 agriculture, SC service enterprise, and M2 industrial. It's not a special use permit in any other districts. Right now it's a by right use for a kennel. So some options we have is we could update the current definition of kennel to align it with state code and with the other county code for animal control. That's any establishment in which 5 or more canines, felines, or hybrids of either are kept for the purpose of breeding, hunting, training, renting, buying, boarding, selling, or showing. I would recommend keeping that as by right status in those districts, A1, SC1, and industrial, and I'd add it as a by right use in B1 business. That could be in conjunction with introducing a new use for assistance dog facility as a special use permit in the A1, SE1 by right in business and industrial. So assistance dog facility proposed definition would be any organization that provides services such as breeding and training of assistance dogs, and educational and training programs to clients, including lodging facilities. Associated definitions would be assistance dog and client, defining who is permitted on the property. Another separate option, which the Planning Commission has reviewed, would be to amend the current definition of kennel to make it inclusive of this project and other projects that would come forward. That definition would be kennel, a place where the primary use is to house, board, breed, handle, groom, train, or otherwise keep or care for dogs, cats, or similar small animals for sale and return for compensation. Kennels may include associated facilities necessary to support the operation, including but not limited to office space, meeting space, and temporary lodging accommodations exclusive to the client's training with the animals. If this is the route we recommend, we would recommend removing it as a by right use in A1 and SE1, add as a special use permit in A1 and SE1, keep as a by right in industrial, add as by right in business. Existing kennels and kennels that operate as a secondary use in conjunction with a dwelling like a home occupation, those would remain permitted by right. So we're talking about explicitly commercial facilities here. So I'm looking for some feedback from the board on which route the board would like the Planning Commission to take. We could, like I said, the first option is update our definition of kennel to align it with state code and county code, keep it by right, and add this new use for assistance dog facilities as a special use. Or expand the current definition for kennel to include all of these uses under one umbrella.
What would you recommend?
I'm fine with either. Either option I'm fine with. The Planning Commission reviewed the second option, but has not reviewed the first option. So I'm looking for feedback if the board has a preference on this, or you can just send it back to Planning Commission for their recommendation
You're
too.
fine with both, but you think one is superior to the other.
I think one of the factors is if you're adding a new use for assistance dog facility, it would be dependent to some level on if you're supportive of this project here in this location. Because you wouldn't want to add a new use, have them apply for it, and then get denied. Now, that's not saying if you add this use that you're guaranteeing their approval. They're aware that they're not guaranteed any approval. They requested us to consider updating our ordinance so that they can apply. The issue right now is they can't even apply because we don't have a use that fits what they're asking for. So that's where this originated.
So, are there any particular benefits to having our definition of kennel aligned with state code?
It's always good to be consistent. That was, that came from some feedback within county staff about updating it to align with those definitions for state code and then the animal control definition.
Any liabilities if they don't?
I don't know. So that's the first option, right? The one that we did in the Planning Commission.
Yes, if we expand the definition for kennel, and that could still be amended to match the state and county code, but include the expansive uses as well.
I don't know. I just, while I'm sitting here, I feel like matching the state code is a good thing. Generally speaking, it allows someone to be able to know, hey, they're in line with the state code. I would say I'm leaning towards number one for the moment, but I also see number two, so I'm not against that one either. Probably got to get some kind of consensus.
Sending it back to sending it to the Planning Commission, since they are supposedly our specialists, our second line behind you, to get their input about which one might be preferable and why. It would certainly give us more information to work with.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think it's fine. Ms. Parr, does that seem reasonable to you? Just send it on back and say, hey, pick one, and we'll vote on this in the August meeting.
Okay. Yep, we will take this to planning commission and bring back their recommendation to you for review. We just felt that we wanted to get this in front of you ahead of time, knowing that it was for a specific project.
Is there an opportunity that this could be put on the June meeting?
No.
No.
For planning commission?
Yeah.
It's on the agenda for discussion, pending what
Got it.
feedback I
So they'll
got
be able,
today.
so they'll be able to give us by our July meeting, we'd be able to do something for this action, right? Perfect. All right, I think it's a great pathway. Skip, sound good to you?
Yeah, we can, so we will be able to decide this issue.
In July. Yes.
Right, and at this point, so it still will involve public hearings to update the ordinance at both planning commission and at the board of supervisors. At this point, we're just getting direction on the best way to proceed with the uses.
I think that's the best way to go about it. Let's do that. Sound good, Mr. Hardy? No, doesn't sound good?
I don't know, we got what it was.
All right, well, you got another chance to complain about it. All right, I think you got your instruction.
Okay. And I have one more, which I'm assuming will be similar direction from you to head back to planning commission. But just so you're aware, in the subdivision ordinance, we have a couple proposed updates. These are a little easier because they follow state code exactly. Sometimes we receive questions regarding requirements for family subdivisions of land. There are protections that the state provides to reduce requirements as opposed to regular subdivisions of land for sale. For example, the minimum lot size requirement for a subdivision is 2 acres, whereas a family division only requires 1 acre. So state code allows localities to adopt an ordinance that would permit family divisions to beneficiaries of trusts. That's not something our ordinance permits right now. As I'm sure you know, that's fairly common practice in Nelson County. So the purpose of the update would be to reflect state code and allow family divisions to be gifted to beneficiaries of a family trust. And that would put, normally with a family division, there's a restrictive covenant that the property cannot be transferred outside the immediate family for a period of 5 years. With the trust language, it's a period of 15 years. And then other topics of discussion for this code particularly is access width. The required width of the right-of-way for family division lots, which are less than 5 acres. Currently, our ordinance is 30 feet. State code actually indicates that all lots less than 5 acres have reasonable right-of-way, no less than 10 and no more than 20, providing egress and egress to the recorded street. So our ordinance is not compliant with that right now. So we'll take that to planning commission. And then minimum lot area, there was some concern about by allowing a 1 acre lot to be created, we're effectively creating a non-conforming lot because normally the minimum lot size is 2 acres. So another topic of discussion for the planning commission, unless you have any specific feedback. And then we've also had some issues with fire code for subdivision roads as far as the slope and grade. So in your packet, there is information from the building official about the grades for that and some discussion about what sections of this fire access code could be pulled out to help our subdivision ordinance make sure that private roads are being constructed safely with all codes.
Okay, sounds good. I say you send that to the planning commission too, and come back to us. Great. Anybody else, everyone else fine with that? You know how to reach it. All right, sounds good. Thank you, Dylan. All right, let's get through B and C, then take a quick recess before we get to budget. Property acquisition financing, Candy. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, this is Candy's, like, first day, kind of, sort of, in sitting over there. So, everyone give Candy a round of applause. Great job. I know, you're doing a good job. All right. Acquisition.
So this is more just informational thing about the issuance of an RFP by our financial advisors, Davenport Public Finance. So they're looking to issue the RFP likely tomorrow in the amount of $2.6 million. They're going to provide for 2 options. for a 3-year term and a 5-year term. And then you would have 3 other options, A, B, and C. They're going to ask for tax exempt, non-bank qualified quotes, taxable quotes, and then option C, which is tax exempt, non-bank qualified, with an option for the county to convert to a taxable interest rate at our discretion. And so the tax exempt, non-bank qualified option would be if the county is primarily looking to use the land for governmental purposes. The taxable option is if the county is thinking more along the lines of private business. And that would be typically at a higher interest rate. Our estimated cost of issuance is about $87,000, and the estimated interest costs for a rate somewhere in the low 4% is about $104,000. Included with the packet is a schedule. These RFPs would be due July 6th. Then Davenport would come and report to this board at the July 12th meeting to present the results of the RFP, and then would ask the board to consider the options and select one to move forward with. So then the EDA would then meet on or about July 13th, because the financing has to include them as well. And our closing would be sometime late July. Any questions on that?
Is this an action item, or is this just?
It is not for this meeting, it's just informational. The action will come July 12th, once we have the RFP results in, and Davenport can advise us as to which option seems to be the best for our purposes.
Great, okay, so August 12th. Does anybody have any questions in reference to Davenport, the financing mechanisms and all that? Okay, thank you, Candy.
Okay.
The next one is an action item, right?
Yes, it is, and Ms. Britt cannot be here today. She's on vacation, but she has submitted a request to the board to fund the removal of a wall in her office to provide for ADA compliant and accessible space for their electoral board meetings and training for their officers of election. She was only able to get one quote. She solicited several other contractors to come look at the job, and she only got the one quote for $4,260. She has got verbal approval to make the renovation from the building owner. So it's up to the board as to whether or not you want to allow her to move ahead with that renovation.
Okay. What is the pleasure of the board on this? I think it's pretty cut and dry. All right, you good? All right, let's get a motion to approve as presented. Motion for Mr. Bart, is there a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. Parr, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll do a vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any oppositions, abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. I'm going to call a quick 10-minute recess. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 10's a little bit much. Yeah, quick 10.
Quick, it's a long time.